My name is Arthur. I am 52 years old, and 3 days ago my own family declared me dead while I was still breathing. There is nothing more revealing than walking into your own living room and finding your brother trying on your favorite watch while your wife argues with a lawyer about how to liquidate your shares before the body even gets cold. But they didn't count on something. They didn't count on the fact that I always keep a key no one knows about and a record that can burn everything down. I watched them from the shadows of the hallway, seeing how they divided my shirts, my savings, and my dignity as if they were vultures over an animal run over on the road. My wife didn't even have red eyes from crying. She was too busy checking the property deeds of the country house. At that moment, the pain turned into a cold stone in my stomach. There were no screams, no dramatic scene, just one certainty. From that second on, they were no longer my family. They were my debtors. And I have come to collect every cent, every betrayal, and every hypocritical smile they threw over my supposed grave. If you like stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave your like and subscribe. Here we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. Oh, understand how we got to that moment of scavenging in my own living room. You need to understand who I was before they decided to bury me alive. For 25 years, I was the foundation that held my family together. At 52, I felt proud of the structure I had built, brick by brick, with a stubbornness that bordered on obsession. I wasn't born with money. What I have, I built with sleepless nights, exhausting business trips, and a discipline that my own blood mistook for coldness. But in this world, you are either the hammer or the nail, and I chose to be the hammer. My wife Eleanor always had the best. She never lacked jewelry, a trip to Europe, or the kind of financial security that only well-managed money can buy. She used to say, I was her rock, her safe harbor. Now I realize that what she loved wasn't the man, but the pedestal I had placed her on. She grew used to comfort as if it were a birthright. In our house, the air always smelled like perfection, an atmosphere I maintained so she would never have to face the ugliness of the outside world. Then there was my younger brother, Marcus. If I was the structure, he was the crack. He was always impulsive and irresponsible, with an almost magical ability to spend money he hadn't earned. Marcus would show up at my office with a rehearsed smile and a new business opportunity that inevitably ended in failure. I rescued him from absolute ruin 3 times. I paid his gambling debts, cleared his name, and eventually gave him a position in my construction company, where his only task was not to get in the way. I did it for my mother, so she could sleep peacefully thinking her sons were united. That's the trap of being the older brother. You think you're protecting your family when you're really just feeding parasites. My life was a routine of apparent success. I had a solid company and an impeccable reputation. I considered myself a smart man, someone who reads the fine print in contracts. But overconfidence is a slow poison. I focused so much on blueprints that I stopped looking into the eyes of those sitting at my table. I didn't notice the exchanged glances between Eleanor and Marcus when I talked about my retirement plans. I didn't pick up on the impatience in their voices when I told them the new project would absorb our liquidity for a while. To them, I was just the ATM that never ran out of money. I was the silent provider who solved problems before they even knew they existed, and they learned to play their roles perfectly. Eleanor was the devoted wife who waited for me with dinner ready, although now I know her mind was elsewhere, perhaps with someone younger, who didn't carry the tired look of someone bearing the weight of the world. Marcus was the grateful brother who nodded at my advice while counting the minutes for me to make a fatal mistake. What they never understood is that my success was built on observation. I'm a man who notices when a screw is loose from 10 meters away. But with family, you let your guard down. You want to believe that blood is a sacred pact. That was my only real sin, believing that love and gratitude were common currency in my own home. A month ago, an accident at one of my construction sites left me completely cut off. There was an explosion, confusion with documents, and thanks to an informant who received the right payment, my name appeared on the list of fatalities. It was a fast, poorly verified report. For 8 days, I was in a regional hospital, without identification, struggling to regain clarity after a concussion that erased my name for a while. When I finally regained consciousness and managed to be discharged, I didn't want to call anyone. I wanted to surprise them. I wanted to see the relief on their faces and feel my brother's embrace. I took a bus back, wearing old clothes and carrying a fresh scar on my forehead. I arrived in the city at dusk, moving like a stranger through streets I had helped build. I took a taxi to my house, that marble fortress I paid for cent by cent. I didn't go through the front door. I used the service entrance, the one we always left open out of carelessness. My plan was to go upstairs and walk into the living room like someone returning from a long trip. But the noise coming from the dining room stopped me cold. It wasn't the sound of mourning. It was the murmur of people who had already buried the dead and were eager to read the will. At that moment, the Arthur they knew truly died. I stayed in the shadows, breathing the heavy air of my own house, feeling like a ghost watching his own looting. Eleanor was sitting in my favorite leather armchair, the one she always said was too big and too crude for the decor. She had a folder open on her lap and a pen in her hand. There were no dark circles under her eyes, no used tissues, none of that emptiness left by losing a partner of 2 decades. What I saw in her eyes was a spark of greed she had never dared to show me before. Marcus was pacing back and forth, stretching his arms as if the space now belonged to him. He stopped in front of my safe, hidden behind the hallway painting. I watched him pull out a piece of paper with a series of numbers. He was trying to open it. My brother, the man I got out of jail for drunk driving, the one who cried on my shoulder when his wife left him, was now trying to break into my private life before my body had even been claimed. "Are you sure the lawyer can speed things up with the construction company?" Marcus asked, still working the digital lock. "If the partners find out Arthur didn't leave an updated will for this situation, they'll want to freeze the accounts." Eleanor let out a dry laugh, one that froze my blood. "Arthur was predictable, Marcus. So obsessed with control that he put everything in my name just in case something happened on site. What he didn't know is that I already spoke with the notary months ago. The legal power he signed last year is still valid. We just need the official death certificate. As soon as we have it, the construction company gets sold off in pieces. I don't want to deal with engineers or unions. I want cash." I leaned against the cold kitchen wall. Every word was an icy blade. She didn't want my legacy. She just wanted to liquidate it. That's when I realized that to them, I was never a person. I was an asset, an investment that had finally matured and was ready to be cashed out. What hurt wasn't the money. It was the contempt. I listened as they mocked my rigidity, my schedules, my obsession with order. Eleanor admitted between sips of my whiskey that she had been waiting for this moment for 3 years. She said being with me was like living in a museum, everything perfect, but lifeless. And while she spoke, Marcus nodded, adding that I had always treated him like a child, that my help was just another way of humiliating him. Ingratitude has a sour smell, and that room was reeking of it. Then, the worst happened. Eleanor called someone on the phone. Her voice changed. It became soft, flirtatious. "Hey, babe." "Yes, everything is already in motion. Marcus is here helping me with the paperwork. Don't worry, in a month we'll be far away from here. No more pretending to mourn, no more Arthur. I love you." She hung up and smiled. My wife had someone else, someone who was probably waiting for my death to finance their new life together. A violent wave of nausea hit me, but I forced it down. My pulse, which should have been racing, began to beat in a slow, rhythmic, dangerous way. At that moment, Marcus managed to open the safe. I heard the success beep and the creak of the metal door. "Here it is," he exclaimed. "Grandpa's gold watch and the titles to the coastal properties." I watched him take the watch, a piece my grandfather gave me on his deathbed, telling me it was for the man in the family who proved the most honor. Marcus slipped it onto his wrist with a vulgar gesture of triumph. Eleanor walked over and kissed his cheek, an alliance of traitors sealed with my own inheritance. That was when I understood the full extent of the injustice. They weren't just stealing from me, they were erasing me. They were dividing my memories as if they were junk at a flea market. They had expelled me from my own home without needing force, simply by removing me from their hearts long before the accident ever happened. I closed my eyes for a second. I could have walked out right then. I could have shouted, hit Marcus, confronted Eleanor, and thrown them out of my property. But that would have been impulsive. That would have given them the chance to invent an excuse, to fake joy at my return. And I didn't want their fake happiness. I wanted them to feel the weight of their own greed. I wanted them to walk straight into the trap thinking the path was covered in flowers. I stepped back toward the garden door with the same caution as a hunter entering the field. I walked out into the cool night, leaving behind the warm light of the living room where two people I loved were toasting to my end. I moved through the dark streets, my mind racing, drawing lines, connecting legal and financial dots. They thought I was predictable. That would be their biggest mistake. They were counting on my death, but they weren't counting on my patience, nor on the fact that, in my world of business, you never put all your eggs in one basket, nor trust all your secrets to a single person. Eleanor believed she had absolute power, but she forgot a small detail I myself mentioned years ago, and that her greed made her ignore. I got into a taxi far from there. My house was no longer my house. My family was no longer my family. Now the world was a chessboard, and I had just made my first move in silence. The war wouldn't be loud, it would be surgical. That night I didn't sleep. I checked into a roadside hotel, one of those places where no one asks for names and payment is made in cash. I sat in front of a small table with a notebook and a pen. I began to map out my own resurrection, but not as the Arthur they knew, rather as the man who had come to settle the score. Revenge, when it's pure, doesn't need shouting. It needs mathematics. The next morning I made the first call. It wasn't to the police, nor to Eleanor. It was to Julian, my lifelong accountant, and the only man who knows where all my financial secrets are buried. Julian stayed silent for 10 seconds when he heard my voice. He thought it was a cruel joke, or a ghost. "Arthur," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We thought you were dead. Eleanor has already submitted the presumed death certificate to the bank." "Listen to me carefully, Julian," I said with a coldness that surprised even me. "I'm not dead, but I want the world to keep believing I am for 72 more hours. I need you to freeze the construction company's operating account under the external audit clause triggered by the death of the majority partner. She thinks she has total power, but she forgot about the contingency clause we signed 5 years ago. The one that states that, in the event of my death, all transfers over $50,000 require a 30-day audit." Julian, who had always been a man of law and numbers, understood immediately. The shine of Eleanor's greed had blinded her. She thought the money would fall into her hands like ripe fruit, but I had designed my company like a fortress. I spent the rest of the day moving like a shadow. I visited an old friend, a former private investigator named Vargas. I asked him for just one thing: to follow my wife. I wanted the name of the man she was talking to on the phone. I wanted photos. I wanted proof that her betrayal wasn't just financial. It was complete. Vargas didn't ask questions. He owed me his life ever since I paid for his daughter's surgery a decade ago. Honor among broken men is the only thing left when family fails you. While Vargas did his job, I handled the legal side. I went to see a notary on the other side of the city, someone who didn't know my family. I presented my original documents, proof that I was alive, and evidence that the death certificate was an administrative error caused by false reports. I revoked every power Eleanor had over my assets. On paper, she was no longer my representative. She was a stranger living in my property. That afternoon, I received a message from Vargas. It was photos. Eleanor was at an expensive restaurant with a younger man, a guy with an athletic build and an easy smile. It was my personal trainer from the gym, the same idiot I used to tip generously for helping with my back. They were laughing, toasting with champagne, planning their future with my hard-earned money. I felt a stab of disgust, but I turned it into fuel. My patience was now my most lethal weapon. The next step was the most delicate. Marcus, my brother, had a weakness: his addiction to appearances. I knew he would take my grandfather's watch and the property titles to his own apartment to keep them safe from Eleanor. He didn't trust her as much as she believed. Vultures always end up pecking at each other. I made a couple of calls to the construction company's suppliers. I informed them, anonymously, that the company was technically bankrupt due to the owner's death, and that they should demand immediate payment of their outstanding invoices from the main office. I knew this would create chaos, forcing Eleanor and Marcus to meet at my house to try to squeeze money out of wherever they could. I made them fight over scraps before taking the plate away. My plan wasn't just to get back what was mine, it was to watch their masks fall. I wanted them to feel the desperation of someone who has everything and loses it in the blink of an eye. I made sure the bank sent a fund irregularity notification to Eleanor's personal account. I knew that would send her into panic. I sat in a cafe across from my house that afternoon, hidden behind a newspaper and dark glasses. I watched them arrive, Marcus with his sports car that I helped pay for, and Eleanor with her air of a cheerful widow. They looked tense. The creditors' calls had already started. The structure they believed they would inherit was collapsing beneath their feet, and they didn't even know why. That night I prepared the final strike. I had the documents, I had the proof of infidelity, I had the revocation of powers, and most importantly, I had the element of surprise. They were counting on me being a memory. They weren't counting on the man who built that empire knowing exactly which wires to cut to make everything collapse without a sound. Revenge is not a dish served cold. It's a contract executed with surgical precision. I looked at my watch, the spare one, and marked the time. Tomorrow, at dawn, the ghost would return home to collect his debts, and there would be no mercy because they had already spent every bit of it I had in reserve. Understood. I have adjusted Section 5 to match the exact required length, maintaining the intensity and rhythm needed for the climax. Here is the text. At 7 in the morning, the city air had a metallic edge. I stood in front of the solid wooden door of my house, the one I had reinforced years ago to feel safe inside. Ironically, the danger was never outside. I felt the weight of the keys in my hand, a comforting cold. I didn't ring the doorbell. I wasn't going to ask permission to enter my own life. I slid the key in with surgical smoothness and turned the handle. The silence of the entryway was swallowed by the murmur of voices coming from the dining room, that place where we had shared so many dinners that I now knew were poisoned with hypocrisy. I walked without hurry, letting my footsteps echo across the marble. As I crossed the dining room arch, I stopped. The scene was the perfect portrait of scavenging. My wife, Eleanor, sat in my chair at the head of the table, wrapped in that silk robe I brought her from a trip where I barely slept just to afford it. Across from her, my brother Marcus was examining documents with the intensity of a starving accountant. On his left wrist, my grandfather's gold watch gleamed under the light of the lamp. They were so absorbed in their loot that my presence went unnoticed for a few seconds. "Trouble with the inventory?" I asked, my voice coming out deeper and colder than I expected. The crash of silence that followed was almost deafening. Eleanor dropped the porcelain cup she was holding. The sound of it hitting the floor was the first act of her defeat. The dark liquid spread across the marble like a stain of blood. Her face, which seconds before showed insolent confidence, deflated, shifting from pale pink to ashen white. Marcus, on the other hand, stood up so violently that his chair slammed against the wall. He remained there, mouth open, eyes wide. Arthur." The name came out of my brother's mouth like a dying breath. The report said that—" "Reports say whatever people are paid to make them say, Marcus," I replied, walking toward the table with a calm that terrified them. "But shadows are free, and they've told me some very interesting things these past few days while I watched you from the dark." Eleanor tried to react. I saw her eyes searching for a lie strong enough to carry the weight of her betrayal. She stood up slowly, forcing an expression of relief that looked pathetic. "Arthur, my love, it's a miracle," she tried to exclaim, but her voice broke. They told us you were dead. We were desperate, trying to put things in order so we wouldn't lose everything. Don't lie anymore, Eleanor. The order you were looking for has a lover's name and a cash liquidation percentage. I cut her off. I've been here. I heard you toasting to my death with my best whiskey. I saw how you planned to sell this house before my body was even identified. I pulled a yellow envelope from my jacket and threw it onto the table. The sound of paper hitting wood was like a gunshot. That's a court order for eviction and a full revocation of power of attorney, I stated. I've spent the last few hours with the notary and the police. The powers I signed are now worthless. This house, the company, and every cent in those accounts are under my exclusive control. I've blocked every access you thought you had. Marcus, cornered, tried the last refuge of cowards. Brother, you have to understand. Eleanor convinced me. I just wanted to protect the legacy. I walked toward him. I grabbed his left wrist with a pressure that made him groan and, with a sharp motion, ripped the gold watch off. The metal was warm from his skin. It disgusted me. Get out of here, Marcus. If you're still on this property in 10 minutes, the men waiting outside for my signal will come in to escort you to the station for theft and fraud. You dug your own grave the moment you opened that safe. He didn't look back. He left the room almost stumbling. Eleanor remained there, alone, staring at the photos Vargas had given me and that I had just spread across the table. They were pictures of her with the trainer, celebrating her new freedom with my effort. You're going to end up alone, Arthur, she said with venom. No one loves you. They only fear you. I'd rather have an empty grave than a bed full of traitors, Eleanor. You have 5 minutes to take your things. What I paid for stays here. Consider it payment of your debt. I heard her footsteps fading away and the final slam of the door. I stayed there alone, adjusting my grandfather's watch to fit my wrist. My pulse was slow, steady, triumphant. There was no joy, only the peace of order restored. The ghost was gone. The owner of the house was back to collect the rest of the debts. 6 months have passed since that morning in the dining room. My house is quiet again, but it's a silence I chose, not one imposed by betrayal. Marcus ended up losing what little he had left. His creditors were not as patient as I was, and now he faces forgery charges that will keep him busy with the justice system for years. Eleanor, for her part, discovered that her lover wasn't so passionate once the money disappeared. The love they swore to each other dissolved the moment the bank accounts were closed and the luxury was gone. I have learned that loyalty is not something you assume just because you share a last name or a bed. Loyalty is a daily transaction they stopped paying a long time ago. Many people ask me if I don't feel lonely in this big house. My answer is always the same. I was never more alone than when I was surrounded by people who were waiting for my death to start living. The construction company is still standing, stronger than ever. I have cleaned my social circle with the same coldness with which I cleared my living room that day. I don't seek reconciliation because there is nothing to rebuild with someone who already declared you dead. Peace of mind has no price, and watching each of them face the consequences of their own actions is the only justice I believe in. Sometimes, the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is watching life collect its debts. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave your like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories.